And taqwa, some of you may remember, taqwa is, although it may be translated as piety or God-wariness, it is a very, very elaborate term. It has many meanings within it. One meaning is to protect against something. Yattaqi shay, to protect yourself from it. So what are we protecting from? When you see in the ayat of the Holy Quran, taqwa comes either ittaqullah, fear, which is normally translated to fear God, or protect or guard against God, for example, or ittaqu yawman, or ittaqu adab. We have different ayat similar to this one. ittaqu ma bayna aydikum wa ma khalfakum, what is before you and what is behind you. And we'll come to that, inshallah, what is meant by before you and what is behind you. Nonetheless, just to focus now on taqwa, what is fear? What is guard against God? God is the most merciful. So what does it mean that we need to guard against God or protect ourselves against God? The ayat that, in fact, of the Holy Quran translate or explain one another. The other ayat explain that it is the punishment, or it is the adab that we need to guard against. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the realm of creation, in the realm of taqween, He made it in a way that certain actions have certain reactions. There are certain good deeds translate into good things, divine rewards. And certain sins and bad deeds have certain consequences. They translate into fire. In fact, the example that is very common and commonly used among scholars from the Holy Quran is the real meaning of taking the rights of the orphans. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those who consume the wealth of the orphans, إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا, they are consuming fire within themselves, in their stomachs. They are consuming fire. It is not that this is the God's fire that He lights up and burns them with it. This is obviously, everything is through the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everything is with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's not something that He initiated against them. It is the translation or the consequence, the natural consequence, or rather the spiritual consequence of their action. In other words, they're burning in their own fire, their own actions. That is why Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says, in five wasaya, he has a very beautiful advice. أوصيكم بخمس. I advise you of 5 things. The second one, he says, وَلَا يَخَافَنَّ أَحَدٌ مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا ذَنْبَهُ. Let not anyone amongst you fear anything except their sins. In other words, we are often told, fear God, fear God. It is fear the way God set up the universe, and how لا تبديل لخلق الله. There is nothing that we can change about it. If He decreed that perhaps lying or deception or backbiting or any of these evil acts have certain consequences, these consequences will happen. We cannot prevent them. That is God against God. And the only thing we can hope for, in fact, is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, perhaps through our relationship with the Quran, with the Prophet, with Ahlul Bayt, and their intercession for us, which translates in us purifying in actual fact. And therefore, we can hope for God's mercy and for those consequences. And this is the meaning of ghafara, the meaning of forgiveness. In Arabic, ghafara is to basically protect, to hide something. In other words, God is going to protect us from the hellfire if we do seek His forgiveness. He will protect us from our own hellfire. To the point that He makes one forget their own sins. He makes the land, the body, the parts, everything forget the sins when we are forgiven. اتقوا وإذا قيل لهم, when it said to those non-believers, اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم. Now taqwa we understand to a degree. Then we come to ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم, what is before you and what is behind you, what is in front of you and what is behind you. The question that is asked, what is meant by what is in front of us and what is behind us. Different scholars have given different meanings in terms of one referring to the punishment of this world and the other one is referring to the punishment of the hereafter. Some said that one is referring to the specific sins like shirk, and the other is referring to general sins that would result into God's wrath and punishment. Some say one is referring to the previous sins, and the other is referring to the future sins, guard against the previous ones by seeking forgiveness, and guard against the future ones by preventing them. So many different suggestions have been given. Nonetheless, the most common one is the fact that certain sins or certain actions have consequences in dunya, and we need to guard against those. And certain actions have consequences in the hereafter, and we also need to be careful and guard against those. In other words, in general, realize that our actions will lead into certain consequences here or there, and that is why the end of it is لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. Perhaps if we guard, if we do our part, we may be included in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that would help us survive or basically be amongst those who are in His paradise, in the gardens, in the hereafter. This is what is said to the non-believers. What is their response? The initial thing is وَمَا تَأْتِيهِم مِّنْ آيَةٍ مِّنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ إِلَّا كَانُوا عَنْهَا مُعْرِضِينَ. No matter what sign is brought to them, what proofs are given to them, they will continue to turn away from it. In other words, the believers, you and I, indirectly, immediately, the Prophet ﷺ, and you and I indirectly, inshallah, we're amongst the believers. We are given a little bit of reassurance. The Prophet is given reassurance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the sense that you don't need to feel bad or question yourself because they are not listening. The previous nations, signs were given to them, miracles happened before them, nations were punished right before them. And the Prophet said in the ayat of the Holy Quran that the nation that was destroyed before you is not far from you in terms of the distance in time, and yet you are now transgressing and denying. So this is the nature of the disbelievers, that you bring all sorts of signs, miracles, whatever arguments or proofs you present to them, they will turn away from it. The next part, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ قَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Amazingly, the link here given in the ayat, the first thing that the believers care. You see the Habib al-Najjar, that great man who came, if he is Habib based on some of the narrations, the man who came to support and help the messengers from the outskirts of the city, when in the story that is in the beginning of Surah Yasin, وَجَاءَ مِنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ رَجُلٌ يَسْعَى. The Quran says a man, does not give the name. The significant part is the action. he came rushing. قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين. He said, "Oh my people, follow the messengers." He calls them my people, cares for them. And even when he was killed by them and he was given and offered the rewards of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the honor, he says, "I wish my people knew. يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين." The godly people, believers, they care. They even care for the non-believers. It's not that they have hatred for them. We have to learn this, inshallah, from the Prophet, from the previous prophets, from the people around the great personalities around the Prophet. Not some of those who were always angry, and we know who they were, and to the point that some narrate that people would be fearful of them, and not of the Prophet. In any case, the great personalities like Ahlul Bayt, Amir al-Mu'mineen, salawatullah salamu alayhi, and his family, they were caring for people. They cared for even the wrongdoers, and they would try to help them, try to guide them, continuously remind them, and so on. This is an example of that. They first told the believers, they come to those and say, guard against, you know, God, or guard against the wrath or the punishment, the consequences that God has set, that is for here or for the hereafter. The next thing, immediately as they're trying to advise them, they tell them that they need to spend. This is something that I want us to reflect on. The immediate thing after that, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنفِقُوا, spend. For the sake of God, give. Why? Because one of the biggest problems that leads many to, in fact, end up in the realm of disbelief or the realm of sinfulness is the lack of purification when it comes to one's wealth. Attachment to dunya, because that reflects itself in attachment to dunya. Focus on this world. So much focus on this world, so much attachment to this world and its material things, that they cannot even look beyond. They cannot see the hereafter, and therefore they cannot guard against the consequences of their actions in the hereafter, or even here. All the focus is on certain possessions and keeping those and hoarding and so on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the words of the believers, He says to them, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنفِقُوا. And the way the believers see it is, مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ. The believers realize that what we have is from God. Anything that we have is from the Almighty God. It's not something that, as Qarun says, "Utitu ala ilmin," and I got it because I deserve it, or because I am so good, I worked hard. You know, people of dunya, this is how they see things, that I worked hard, I deserve it, I studied, I did this, I did that. The believers, they say, no, God gave me. If it's science, knowledge, and studying, He guided me and granted me the intellect to be able to reach there. If it's the ability to economize and provide for myself and my family, it is through guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever it may be, it's from Him. It's all His sustenance. So many people who worked harder than myself and studied more than myself do not have what I have, and therefore, and so many people who are, in fact, Imam Ali alayhi salam once was asked, and he responded with a beautiful poem that is said to be from him, that how often do we see people who are very intellectual, very smart, yet financially they're struggling, and how often do we see fools, people who would they cannot put a proper sentence together, and they are so wealthy, so affluent financially. So the Imam says this is in fact a proof from God that He is the sustainer. He's telling you and I that don't think it's what you do. It's I am undur. He says in the Holy Quran, look how we have put some above others in terms of the positions in this life, in this dunya. However, what is more significant here, some of these things are not in our control. Yes, we may control a little bit here and there, but the reality is, it is ultimately in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The hereafter and the positions in the hereafter, because these positions here are the test. The positions in the hereafter are the result of our actions. So how the test comes to us is relative to our action, to our abilities. Some are tested with wealth, some are tested with poverty. But the hereafter, whether we become amongst the higher positions or lower positions, and that's not financially and materialistically, rather it's spiritually, the positions that are given, and consequently the rewards of those positions are based on our actions, and whether we prevented certain sins or whether we indulged in sins, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, and so on. So when the believers say to these people, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنْفِقُوا, from what God has given you, their response, the response of the non-believers, this is their response that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, He doesn't say قالوا, He emphasizes that قال الذين كفروا. When it's said to them, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ, the response could have been قالوا, they said. It doesn't say they said. They said, the ayah says the non-believers said. In other words, this kind of a response is a response of lack of faith or basically lack of belief. That they responded, the non-believers, when it said to them, spend, they الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, they say to the believers, what? Do we feed the one whom, if God wanted to, He would have fed them? The excuse from shaitan and from their anfus, from their basically possessive and the nafs that is so attached to dunya, their first response is, well, God gave us, God didn't give them. If God wanted to give them, He would have given them. Why are you expecting me to give them? Forgetting that this is a test. He gave you as a test and He did not give them as a test. And that those differences are a test for both of you. In another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, would they ever, those whom God has given, would they ever give in a way that they make themselves equal to the ones beneath them financially? Their workers, their slaves, if at the time of slavery, or now their workers, the people who are under them. You will not find people of dunya, will not find them putting other humans as their equal. This is the real meaning of the keeping and being stingy and hoarding and not giving. They put themselves above. You know, I have to get richer. They can have a comfortable living. At best, they can have a comfortable living, but they're beneath me. Nobody will ever think that as long as I can sustain myself and I'm able to have all these people live like me, all be comfortable. No, the expectation of people of dunya is I am the one above, and they work for me, and I have to continuously keep getting richer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, no, the real believers, they look فَهُمْ فِيهِ سَوَاء, they look at others as their equal. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he says, humans are either your brother in faith or equal in humanity. You're equal in humanity. In other words, you should treat them how you like to be treated. You're equals. You're not better than them. Imam al-Askari alayhi salam, al-Hasan al-Askari, salawatullah wa salam alayhi, he says, No one's intellect is complete unless they look at others and say he's better than me. And a higher level that I don't know in the eyes of God if he is better or I am better. Therefore, I look at them and I care for them. I want to help them. Not that I say, well, if God wanted to help them, he would have helped them. I work hard. They don't know how to live. They don't know how to work. This is what they are. This is the, the best that they can get, and so on. All the excuses. قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين. The last part, they say that you are certainly in clear error. This statement could be, in fact, they have given suggestions that it could be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a pause and response to the non-believers, that you are clearly in error, or in clear error. The other suggestion is that the believers responded to the non-believers saying, you are. But the most likely meaning or interpretation is that themselves, the non-believers, in their response to the believers, because they are proven as being in clear error, they want to basically cast the same judgment on the believers, and they say you are clearly in error. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from our greed and to make us amongst those who give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and guard against the consequences of our actions in this world and in the hereafter. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi. Apologies, it took a little longer than what we normally do. Inshallah, we'll resume with our normal recitation and reflection tomorrow, and we will continue the tafsir of Surah Yasin next week, inshallah, on Sunday. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Any questions or comments? This is Baqiyah before the regime of the Saudi family with the Wahhabis put hands in hands to destroy it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to destroy them and bring back the victory for the believers and bring our Imam to us, inshallah, and the relief of the Ummah through him. Okay, inshallah. I seek your permission and we'll resume tomorrow, inshallah.